Welcome to another episode of Chats with Shantla. Welcome to another episode of Chats with Shantla, and I have the amazing Ty that is on the show with me tonight, Ty Noel, and she is going to be speaking and chatting with us all about puberty, periods, and more. And do we have a show for you? So if you're just now tuning in to this is your first episode, this is going to be such a treat because she has so many gems that she's going to be speaking about. So how are you doing this evening, Ty?
I'm well. How are you?
I am good. I'm so excited for you to be here today. She looks absolutely stunning. I hope everyone can see that. But Ty, I'm going to jump right into this conversation because it is so good for me. And I'm so excited to talk about it. And we did have someone that had a lot of comments last time. So I hope that there's a lot of comments and engagement this time as well. But I want you to go through, and Ty is a registered nurse. So Ty, just give us a little bit of your background before we even jump into this conversation. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, it just started to rain here, so my service is acting up just a little bit, so there's a little lag.
Okay. It's okay. No problem. We're going to make it work. It's okay. It's working. It's a little bit, it's going to catch on. It's going to catch on because we cannot control the internet. So everyone just have patience with us because Ty is from outside of a different location and she's having a lot of weather. So it's making her internet lag somewhat. It's going to catch up and people are joining. So if you just now joining, if you have a question in regards to puberty,
I can see myself, but I can't see.
You can't see me? So Ty, maybe you can log off and come back in and see if that works. So as Ty, we cannot control technical difficulties, but we are going to continue this conversation. So again, we're talking about puberty, periods, and more. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll get them to Ty. Ty is a registered nurse and she's going to be speaking about her experience through puberties, and more. So we're going to be talking about the phases of a menstrual cycle, period trauma, fibroids, and endometriosis, why people of color get heavier periods than our counterparts, health disparities, why we don't utilize resources, the mistrust in the health system and the health systems and their providers. Also, we're going to be talking about when to visit a gynecologist, what age is appropriate. So there's a whole bunch of things that we're going to be talking about. And again, as Ty is getting, her internet, that we're having a little bit of technical difficulties because of the weather at her location, but just hang in there. Do not disconnect. We're going to give Ty an opportunity to get that resolved. But if you do have a question in regards, as Ty is doing that, let's see, she's coming back. She's joining back on. So I'm going to remove that. And once she gets back in there, I'm going to bring her back on the screen. But as Ty is resolving technical difficulties, I wanted to ask the audience, what type of questions do you have about puberty, periods, and more? So we're going to have Ty come on and get the, okay, I think it might be working. Is that a little better now, Ty?
Yeah, I apologize. I live literally in the woods.
No, we cannot control. So. We cannot control what happens. So no apologies, and God's on our side. So the weather may be dealing, but we know it's going to work out. So we have some people that just want to shout out that's watching. Lisa, thank you so much for watching. And Misty, my girl, she is absolutely adore her. Hopefully she'll be on Chats with Shantla and talk about all the great things that she's doing. But Ty, I just want you to introduce yourself. Some people already know you, but you're grown now. You're not little Ty from, up the street. So just reintroduce yourself and what you do for a living.
That's so funny. It's so funny too when you think about it because you don't really feel like a grown person all the time. Like, I mean, I have a child myself, so like I know I'm grown, But especially when I'm home, sometimes I just feel like I was when I was little. But yes, I'm Ty. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse 8 years now. I also am a doula. I own and
Okay. What
operate
is that?
Noel's Nest
Before you
full
pass that
spectrum.
up, what is a doula?
Okay, so doula is a birth worker, very similar in practice to a midwife,
Okay.
except that now midwifery and doula work are different in that a midwife could actually deliver your child, whereas a doula is kind of more of a support role in today's work.
Okay.
So I do breastfeeding education through that, pregnancy loss counseling, postpartum doula work, and like fertility counseling as well. So yeah,
Okay.
that's what
And
I
Ty,
do.
you said you've been a nurse for 8 years?
Yeah.
Wow. You
Yeah,
don't
I'm
even
coming
look
on my
like you
eighth
could be
year.
in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, because that field
Oh, well, thank you.
is definitely challenging. It's such a challenging field. And
Yeah.
thank you for the work that you
Yeah.
do and how you got your profession and your other coworkers and professionals got us through the pandemic. So I really appreciate all that you do and that you continue to do. So kudos to Ty. So we're going to get into this conversation of puberty periods and more. And the first thing that I want Ty to dive into is the phases of a menstrual cycle. So, Ty, could you tell us a
Oh,
little bit
yeah.
more about the phases?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because a lot of women and more men don't realize that there are 4 phases that women go through during their full monthly cycle. And this phase is completed in men within a day. And so that's why when women get this stigma that, when we are on our menstrual cycles, then and men or other women will say, well, she must be on her period or something like that. That's because we have these ups and downs and ebbs and flows in our cycle that people are unaware of. And so it does make us a little bit dysregulated, which is understandable. But so the first phase um, is where your uterine begins to it's your menstrual cycle, right? Well, your period, not the full cycle. That's when your uterine lining sheds. You get cramps. You might be fatigued. Some people have severe cramps during this time. Some people are nauseous. Some people are very tired. I myself could sleep for days when my cycle comes. And then right as our period starts, into the next maybe 12 to 14 days is your follicular cycle. That's when it begins the first day of your period. So it kind of overlaps with menstruation. And then it goes into ovulation. And ovulation is that little window of time where your egg is released and it goes down the fallopian tube to meet the sperm. And if it doesn't, then we'll have our period again. But prior to that is the luteal phase. That's when the egg actually leaves the ovary and is going through the fallopian tube. That's when women usually report feeling like their best. That's when you have a lot of energy, you feel good, you look good. And then we go right back into our period. So those are the cycles.
Okay. I love that. And thank you so much for that breakdown. Thank you all for joining. I have the amazing Ty Noel. She is a registered nurse, and we are talking about puberty periods and more. And we actually have a question, and this is a few parts. There's a lot in this question, so you're probably going to need to break it up in a few parts. So it comes from Misty, and she said that, hi, ladies, happy Saturday. My question is, how do you, as a health professional, address the importance of not using products with fragrance? A lot of females of all ages seem to not be educated on the importance of having no perfume, tampons, pads, etc. And then what are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach this as a doula? So go ahead and address those questions.
Thanks for the question, Missy. That's a great question. As far as the use of fragrance, I try to open those conversations and to make them, Shantla and I were talking prior to this about shame, to kind of take the shame away from those conversations so that we can be open about them, and that so that people are more receptive of them. Because when there's a shame and there's a stigma behind it, and then you try to educate people or have conversations on it, that dissonance doesn't allow them to be open to the things that you're trying to tell them. So I try to to first address that. And then the fragrance part is a great point, not only in feminine products, like things that claim to balance your pH or that smell fresh or smell like flowers. Those are very detrimental to our pH balance. Actually, they can change the flora in our vaginal canal. But not only in that aspect, fragrance is very dangerous as a chemical additive in general. There's fragrance in relaxers, which is very common in our community. And it's actually shown that fragrance in those relaxers increases fiber rates in African American women, which is already a problem for us. So not only is fragrance detrimental in the products that we use when we're menstruating, but it's also dangerous in the things that we use in other places on our body. This question said a lot of females all ages seem to be educated on the importance of not having perfume pads, right? What are your thoughts? Okay. And as a doula, wow, that's a good question. There's a lot of ways that fragrance is introduced when you're pregnant as well, or it's not so much a problem when you're pregnant because you do experience that amenorrhea. Oh, some women do. It is common for other women to spot throughout their periods. But yeah, I just try to keep those conversations open and honest, and I try to make people not feel ashamed about any part of it. I like to make them feel very comfortable. And I think the most important part as a as a nurse and a doula is kind of just building that connection with your patient or your client to make them feel comfortable so that the conversation is open and honest. Because I think sometimes people will look at you, even if you look like them and you're relatable to them.
Ty, can you repeat that? Because there was a little lag, so we didn't get what you said in the last part of what you stated.
Oh, I apologize. I was saying that, as a healthcare provider and a doula, I try to still really create a comfortable environment. And I think that's important because even if I look like my patients or my clients and I'm relatable to them, some may still be hesitant to tell me things just because you are in a position like healthcare or being a doula. So I just try to really make sure I don't ever make that person feel uncomfortable or like they can't say something that's true. And I really just try to connect with them so that we can be open and honest in that conversation.
Misty, thank you so much for that great question. And there were so many great parts in that question. And Ty, thank you so much for your response. And she said, love it. She respects your area of expertise and many blessings. So thank you so much, Misty, for joining. I do have Kai Harris. She said, keep being great to the both of us. And also a great friend of mine who is Miss Rittenauer, Becky. And a lot of you guys know her as Miss Rittenauer in high school. She said, love you both, ladies. Yes, she said, thank you for doing this. She also has a question, which her question I think is so great. And she has it's two questions. She said that this is clearly an important subject for women and girls, but can we talk about why it is so important for boys and men to know about these issues as well? What do you say about that? Because I agree 100%, because it's not just periods just aren't a female thing. It's what females get and women get, and girls get, but it's also men should be more, okay with having this conversation because a lot of them are fathers to daughters. So what is your feedback on that?
Absolutely. Oh, I could say a whole bunch about this. I feel like it's important for boys and men to be aware of the normalcy of menstruation, how it works. Again, that takes away from that stigma and that shadow that a lot of women operate in because of their periods. If the conversation were more open between boys and girls, and then young men and young women and men and women, it would be more normal. It wouldn't be stigmatized. It would be accepted. Men might help their partners more. A lot of women do experience periods that aren't smooth, that can be tumultuous and throughout their lives. And then they have male partners who really don't understand it. And they might think that they're just being very angry or that they're exaggerating their pain, or, you know what I mean? But if they could understand the differences in the way that periods can happen and the things that women have to deal with during that time, they could be better partners. And then vice versa. It's important for women to understand male anatomy as well, but I think it's important for boys and men to understand periods, especially because mostly every woman is going to get one, including their daughters. And then they might run into a time where the mom isn't available, or they don't have a female family member or maybe friend that they can go to discuss these things with their daughter, which would be, beneficial for them to find. But, if they find themselves in a case where it's just them, they're more understanding. And then again, that takes away, which is a very big part of having your period, that trauma and that stigma. I also think it's important because, again, as men, when you do get a partner, this is part of a woman's cycle. You might end up having children with this woman, and you need to understand what it takes to be able to do that. I think that's important. You shouldn't be doing that if you don't understand the full process of it. And if you're not appreciative of it, you know what I mean? This it's not a trivial thing to be a woman, and it's not a trivial thing to have a menstrual cycle. And I think that it's important for men to understand what a gift it is.
Absolutely. It is a tremendous gift. Ty and I were talking prior, and we as women on this planet, we literally continue the life cycle. And it is a huge gift to be able to give life, and to be able to have men understand that it's not, oh, she's just having a period, she's having PMS. Like, they always, like, we're like not having a good day, it's automatically goes straight to, she must be on her period. It's like, no, maybe you caused me to not have a good day, or I just wasn't having a good day. It doesn't mean it's always PMS. But Miss Rittenauer said that, she said she also just wanted to add that your brother seemed to be not bothered by talking about periods and menstruation. So kudos to your parents for making sure that, it was understood. So she just wanted to shout him out as we're talking about how men need to be understanding and compassionate. And Misty also said, she said, yes, men also need to be educated on the hormones that change, the hormone changes. And we are all a collective of the stigma that when a woman is on her menstruation, or menstrual, that men should stay away, or that we are, the B. And that is so true, because that is what people assume. Like, stay away from her. Like, even like cartoons, like I remember when I was younger, they would have like the girl would turn into like a devil or a monster, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who wants a period? When it was very frightening. So it kind of subliminally put messages that made boys and men think that we were negative. It was never a positive. Even commercials now cracks me up when I see like a girl in a white bikini doing a cartwheel on the beach. And it's a feminine product commercial. Hey, nobody's doing that. Like, nobody's doing that. Let's be real. That's not what's happening. I was balled up in the bed crying, but I was not doing cartwheels. I wasn't on a beach, and I definitely didn't have nothing white on. So I'm just saying, I'll keep it on the eye. That was my experience. I was like, this is really strange. But you spoke a little bit, Ty, earlier just about period trauma. Can you go a little bit more into detail about what that is and how it actually shows up in, a lot of people's lives, a lot of women's lives?
So period trauma could be whatever your experience negatively through your period is to you, right? So for one woman, it might not be what it is for the next. So for maybe myself, let's take, for example, when I got my period, and then, it's very common for moms to be, either excited for their daughters sometimes, or that they'll just, talk about it, but they're not being malicious, right? But it's something that you already carry a shame for because of your lack of education related to your period, that it's very traumatizing. And at least it was for me. You know what I mean? It's like, why would I want everyone to know that this is what's going on with my body? But a lot of that was just related to the shame that I felt because of my period. And this is my first one. So, these thoughts had to have been ingrained in my mind prior to that. And that's because of the women that I knew who had already had their periods and who experienced trauma through it as well. So, you know, when we have that severe cramping, when we have a super heavy flow, things like that are traumatic for us. When we're missing things, we can't go somewhere. And then we're afraid to tell people what's going on. So that's a traumatic experience too. And then you're kind of dealing with it all by yourself. We're hiding it. We're hiding away ourselves, and we're not really sharing what's going on. And not only in that aspect, but trauma related to our periods is an exclusive thing for women of color, Native women, because our periods have a deep history of exploitation in our history. There is a doctor who's credited for being the father of gynecology, right? And he actually, I think I have if you don't mind, I think I have a
not at all. We all want to be educated.
Available. I'm always in a book, and I had just read this book. It's a great book. It's called Caste. It's by Isabel Wilkerson. She wrote another super popular book. It's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?
Yeah, I have that book.
So there was an excerpt, a little quote from this same doctor in this book that I had read just recently. And the doctor's name is James Marion Sims. He is the one I mentioned is credited for being the father of gynecology. So these are still the teachings that our current gynecologists that we're seeing are being taught from. This is the man that they learned from. So it says the Dr. James Marion Sims would later be heralded as the founding father of gynecology. He came into his discoveries by acquiring Black women in Alabama and conducting savage surgeries that often ended in disfigurement or death. He refused to administer anesthesia, saying vaginal surgery on them was not painful enough to justify the trouble. It continues and says that another Louisiana surgeon perfected the cesarean section by experimenting on Black women he had access to in the 1830s. Others later learned how to remove ovaries and bladder stones. They performed these cabin experiments, in search of breakthroughs for their white patients who would one day undergo surgery in hospitals, but under the availability of anesthesia. So this is the history of gynecology, and you could see why there is a big mistrust in healthcare, and then the trauma related to the entire experience of your period and your reproductive organs and your body as a woman. So that's a very deep history for us. It's very traumatic. And then prior to us sitting on this live, we were having the conversation, and I was telling you how it's almost detrimental for us to get our periods as Black women. It's never a safe time to be a Black woman in America, right? So that first hard sign of womanhood is your period. So it would almost be beneficial for us to hide the fact that we're on our periods, and that creates a lot of trauma around that as well.
Yeah. And the other thing I think, thank you so much. And Misty said she heard about the book, and also like how traumatizing it was to actually, have to go through that. And she also said, and trauma like that can be passed down between generations and through generations.
That's one of my favorite topics. I just made a post about it the other day. I'm not going to go too far into it because I'll go on a tangent. But that is called epigenetics. That trauma being passed from generation to generation is a term called epigenetics. And what happens is the trauma is so life-changing, literally, that it changes the way that your genes are encoded. And it does that for generations at a time. And I had said in the same post that epigenetic trauma, coupled with the idea that, and this is relative to reproduction and your period, women are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have in their life. So if you're a woman and you are forming in your mother's belly, you were already there when your mother was in your grandmother's belly. So you can imagine how their life experiences affect you. And then on top of that, you have that epigenetic factor as well. So.
Wow. Listen, that is something that I definitely want to have a sideline conversation with you, but definitely you'll be back and we can talk even deeper on that. But Misty said, you better speak. And I agree, because so many times we want to blame it on other things when it's just in our DNA. And now it makes sense when it's like, it's in your DNA. It really is in your DNA. And trauma is one of those things. And then, educating yourself is how you get through the trauma and how you heal from it.
Absolutely.
But it's not by just telling somebody, I'll just move on. It didn't happen to you, it happened to your great grandmother. Well, it still happened to me
Right.
because I was there. I might not have been there fully as we want to look at it, but there's a lot of things that happen. And when you think about all that you're talking about, it is so beneficial. And I'm glad that you all are joining in. I'm Shantla Israel. I'm the host of Chats with Shantla, and I have Ty Noel. And we are speaking about periods, puberty, and more, and so much more. And she's a registered nurse and she's a doula. But besides that, she is just an educated woman. And she is giving her experience, life experiences, things that she's read, and how she's been educated. And if you're just now joining, you'll want to hit the replay button to get the beginning of this, but make sure you're tuning in. If you have a question, put it in the comment section and I'll bring it up on the screen and ask on your behalf. But we're going to keep this going because I want to talk about how you spoke earlier a little bit about how heavier periods happen amongst people of color and how that also connects to something else that we're going to talk about. But what studies have where did you get that from? What studies have you read? What have you experienced? Because I want to raise my hand. I was one of those people that had an extremely heavy period and nobody could explain it to me. Even to this day, like no one ever really gave me a great explanation. So what's your feedback on it?
Sure. A lot of this information, I tell everybody, we're in the age of free information, right? So we can always go online, and I probably look up something related to Black women's healthcare maybe once a day. But it's nice because you can filter out what is accurate information and true information and studied information. You can get scholarly articles. Those are going to usually be .org links or edu links related to the respective colleges that might have those on file. You can search through your local library's information and database and see what they have available to you. And a lot of it I just acquired through my career in healthcare, and then as a doula, and that kind of heavy focus in women's studies and specifically to women of color. But that information is available and it is out there, but I do recommend that everybody does that with proper discernment, that they're also aware that even though these studies are done, a lot of them are still done under a lot of these studies are still performed by white doctors and white scientists and males at that. So we have to kind of take what we get with a grain of salt. I think that it's oftentimes more beneficial to collect your own information from the women around you.
Understood.
So that's where I've gotten a lot of my information too. I make these conversations open with my female friends, my female family members. I'll often ask them, or I'm never shy about my period, you know what I mean? Or what's going on and at what point of the month I am in my cycle. Mm-hmm. I'll say all the time, you know what, I'm so hungry right now, I have to eat. I know I'm about a week out from my period. Or I'll talk about how, when I'm in that luteal phase, at the end of it, I know I'm moving forward because my face will get real oily. I'll start to break out. I'm one of those people who experience acne in their periods. But back to the heavy period question, Black women do experience, on average, a more heavy period than their white counterparts. There really isn't a lot of research behind why that is specifically. It could be related to environmental factors and genetic factors as well. But Black women especially, do experience fibroids at a higher rate than their white counterparts, and almost every Black woman will have a fibroid of some kind by 50. Some of the research related to that is our product use. I had mentioned earlier that there's fragrance in relaxers. Those fragrances in these different chemicals tend to increase your estrogen levels, which drives the production of those fibroids, which then drives the production of cancer, right? So, oftentimes I like to say that some things just simply aren't on accident, and we'll find out later in life that they aren't on accident. That's why we have a deep mistrust of, again, healthcare already. People were experimenting on us and not telling us things and giving us things to ingest and consume that later we found out were detrimental to our bodies. Even Johnson & Johnson, a lot of Black women grew up putting powder in their, in their pantyhose or in their panties. And then it come to find out that it was causing ovarian cancer. and uterine cancer. So when these relaxer products are marketed to us and advertised to us, they're not telling us that we're increasing our risk for fibroids and then in turn increasing our risk for cancer. So
wow. And the things that we just don't know, and like you said, some things are just, intentionally done to a specific group of people, and it just happens. But it's like you said, having conversations about what's going on in your body will free up and make a safe space for somebody else to share, that you'll have a commonality and something that you're not the only one experiencing it, and so you could be a support system to each other. And when you spoke about fibroids, I also know fibroids and endometriosis sometimes are not, I don't want to say connected, but I had both. And I don't know if there was a connection to both of them, but I do remember as a young girl with the baby powder, I do remember using relaxers. I'm not saying that's the only thing, because I know genetically some things can be passed down to you, but I know generations before me were doing the same practices when it came to personal hygiene. So, what is your take on fibroids and endometriosis? That a lot of women have, and especially women of color, when it comes to these two things.
So again, these things fibroids specifically are more common amongst Black women again. And then endometriosis related to that, my concern with endometriosis in our community is that we allow things to go so far before we treat ourselves for them, before we seek help for them, which again is understandable. We have a deep mistrust with healthcare providers. So whereas white women are seen and treated for fibroids and things like endometriosis, usually almost right away when they see a provider. I think the statistic is they're diagnosed and treated about 4 years earlier on average than Black women. And this is because we tend to suffer in silence. There's that, strong Black women trope that a lot of Black women are destined to hold on to. I have to be strong. I can't talk about how painful this is or how much it's affecting my life, and then they don't really talk to their providers about it or go see their providers for that matter. And then there's another thing connected to that, which kind of ties back into period trauma, is that we don't talk about our periods as a community. So we tend to think that heavy flows and super bad cramps and nausea and vomiting are regular, when in some cases that they are. But when we get on the more extreme ends of it, it's not regular. But we as a community of Black women don't always know that it's not regular, because we don't have a lot to compare it to, because there is that history of shame and shadow material related to our periods. So I feel like if we were more open and honest about our communication, we would be able to be treated for these fibroids and endometriosis sooner than later.
Absolutely. And you just made me have a memory. I remember in high school, one of my classmates, she knew that she had endometriosis when we were in high school. And I don't know what, her parents took her to the doctor, or her mom, or however, but she knew in high school that she had this. I did not find out that I had that until I was in my 30s. And, it just goes to show, it was like almost 2 decades later after her, when I found out. And it's sad, but it does relate to, for me, like going to the doctor, at least to the gynecologist, was like, you only go to the gynecologist if you're having sex. I never knew any other reason to go besides, like, now I know it's to make sure that your reproductive organs are healthy and you're healthy. It has nothing to do just with sex, but that is how I took it. And that's how I understood it, is you're too young. You don't need to go. You're not grown enough. It was just a lot of different things. And it's just, we weren't, my experience was just so different. Misty said, yes, it should be talked about and taken as serious as postpartum, in her opinion. And she said it's just as important. And, earlier she said, learning is through blogs, podcasts, etc. Let's normalize it. But I also want to get right into how you said it so many times already, but the mistrust of the healthcare system and healthcare providers. Why do you think that is? I know you spoke about what you read from the book. I completely get that. And that is horrific when I think about it. It's just the thought, it makes me think about the Tuskegee experiment. It makes me think about so many other things. And, it's just, sometimes unfathomable to think about that this is, and people think like this was hundreds of years ago.
Mm.
It wasn't, like it wasn't that long ago, but just give me some feedback on why you think there's such a big mistrust. You already landed on so many things, but what else can you share with us?
Oh, I could give plenty of examples why there's such a deep mistrust here. One of the things that I like to mention is the connection to the full spectrum of women's reproductive system, how we're still at we're still in this hole of healthcare when it comes to the entire system of reproduction. From pregnancy to birth, we experience the most deaths per capita for a developed nation. So Black women and their babies are dying here at a higher rate than any other developed nation, not third world countries, not countries
Right.
who aren't well to do. These are developed countries with good standard of healthcare, and we are here dying at a higher rate than any of these other countries. So it's not just a lack of distrust for gynecology in the respect of menstruation. There's a lack of distrust for gynecology in the area of the full reproductive system from pregnancy to birth, and rightly so, because why are we dying at a higher rate than any other woman in this country? It's because, again, there's that implicit bias that a lot of providers have that they might not even realize that they have. Some of them are fully aware of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And should they be healthcare providers? Probably not. But that's not something that there's kind of a screening for. And then there's other healthcare providers who are well-to-do, but do have that implicit bias. And again, they believe that Black women don't experience pain at the same rate that other women do. They tend to not take their symptoms as serious. And then there's this long history. You mentioned the Tuskegee experiment. There's a long history of experimenting on Black women and men in general, but Black women too. Again, the whole history of gynecology is kind of forcing these Black women to take part in these surgeries and experiments and anesthetize and fully feeling the pain of it and expecting them not to even cry while it's going on or
Right.
risk have their lives taken because of it. When we talk about the healthcare disparity in general and why there's a mistrust, we face a disparity when it comes to healthcare. It's hard for us to find doctors. It's hard for us to find doctors who look like us. Some of us lack insurance or, the mobility to get to these appointments. And then people will say, well, why don't you use your community resources? Why don't you use somewhere like Planned Parenthood where you can get these exams and things for free or at a really low cost? Then people aren't thinking about, for Black women, this is a scary experience because, again, we already have that deep mistrust of healthcare, and there's a history behind that as well. The woman who started Planned Parenthood and who is kind of mentioned as the mother of birth control was a eugenicist. She believed that black people, not just Black women, Black people shouldn't be alive. And that we should be sterilized, which is another thing that we talked about. Black women have been sterilized throughout history and told that they were getting another procedure. They would come later to find out that they had been sterilized and unable to reproduce children. And people think these things are happening hundreds of years ago. These things were happening into the 2010s and the 2020s in prisons. Black women, Native American women are still being sterilized during their stays and not voluntarily. So you can understand why there is that deep mistrust of healthcare when it comes to our bodies.
Absolutely. And I have so many comments that I want to share with you. One of them is from Miss Rittenauer, Becky, a friend of mine for almost 4 decades now. And she said, this is one of, like, having the conversation, she said, this is one of the reasons that she's grateful for you, Ty. She said, we need people like you out there ensuring that all women, but especially women who come from marginalized community, get taken seriously and treated fairly. Absolutely. I am so happy to have her as a friend and also a liaison. And you just talking about it openly with so much authority and courage and confidence. This has to continue to happen. And Misty also talked, she said, let's also talk about prevention, because if you're a balanced mind and your body and your spirit, you won't need to go to the doctor as often, have routine exams. Our bodies are designed to heal itself but that's another conversation for Chats with Chantla, and that's why she needs to come on. So we'll be having that conversation and more deeply with her. And then she also mentioned that she said, let's not forget to mention that the pharmaceutical and medical field is the biggest business in America. So if you're healthy, then they're not making money. And wow.
And I don't disagree.
Wow.
It's,
That's huge, you know. And when I think about like all the things, even like, I don't know about you, but every time like I don't watch a lot of TV, and I know that you don't watch TV practically at all. But if I am watching something, the commercials when I was growing up, it used to be like Kellogg cereal and stuff like that. Now everything is a drug. Everything is a commercial about a drug, like what you need. So it's like you're
side effects at the end.
Yeah. And then it's like telling you you're sick. Like it's not, talking about, plant a garden, go to your co-op to get fresh food.
Right.
It's never anything like that can help.
Well, medicine isn't preventative. And it's not meant to be. That was a concept I understood prior to being a nurse, but seeing it firsthand, oftentimes, you have to find a fine line, especially not for nothing, speaking on public platforms, you kind of have to find a fine line between what you want to say out loud and what you can only say, in the comfort of your friends. So it's not that I have this experience as a healthcare provider that has given me any more trust as a Black woman or as a woman in general. It's, if anything, it's maybe more mistrusting. So these are statements that I agree with, but I walk a fine line. So
yeah, absolutely. And my next question, I want to go and kind of segues into, how often should, because we talked about gynecologists, but how often should a female visit the doctor if she has to, especially for her reproductive health?
So I think that this varies woman to woman. I think that every woman should be seen for a yearly, at least, to just be tested, because especially, again, Black women, even, if you can go find a Black provider, a woman provider, but for women in general, once a year, I would say at least, so that you can make sure that your pap smear is regular, and that you're being tested and checked out for things that might be common in your family that you might not know about, or things that are just more common to us now because of environmental changes or dietary changes and things like that, cancers and different things that women are more susceptible to. You at least want to make sure that you're not, experiencing any of these things that you might not know are symptoms related to them, that you can tell to your doctor during that yearly, and follow up from there. But it's especially more important if you are a woman of color and or you do have mitigating factors from, family history or anything like that. So I would say at least once a year.
I agree. Thank you so much for that. And then the other question is, I think, a lot more sensitive. What age should a girl visit the gynecologist?
I think that this is a sensitive topic. I think that it might be up to that individual parent when a female should be seen by the gynecologist. I had an experience young that I think I was maybe 16 when I first saw the gynecologist. Now, again, I do have a familial history of cervical cancer, so I did kind of have to see them earlier than somebody else might. But even at 16, that experience was very traumatizing to me. It's not something that I would ever subject my own daughter to so early, and it's not something that I would subject my daughter to, so early to, without the proper education. And again, that's not at either my parents' detriment. It was just, people say the way of the world. You didn't really focus on educating your daughters on things that they might experience during their menstrual cycle or their visit at the gynecologist. So myself, I would say that if you aren't aware of your child being sexually active, or if you know that they aren't sexually active, probably wait until she's 18. And if she's experiencing things, heavy periods or really bad cramps that seem to be a little bit more than what the normal cramp would be, or again, if you have a familiar history of things, cancers of the reproductive organ at all, you should probably be seen at an earlier age. But other than that, I wouldn't subject my child personally to a gynecologist visit until she was 18.
Yeah. And Misty also had a comment. She said a parent would need to really use discernment, as you stated. And she was said this before you even said it. So you guys are aligned. And she said having that communication, because it could be very traumatic to a child, especially if they're an introvert
Absolutely.
and they don't even know. And let's, like, we're going to talk a little bit about it later, but let's not forget that most of the gynecologists are men. And like, you
Yeah.
are on a table and your most private area is being exposed to a complete stranger, but on
Yeah.
top of that, they're a male.
Yeah.
So it's not like there are so many factors in that you have to be mentally prepared for,
Mhm.
emotionally prepared for, and and after, even at 18, still make sure that you support your child,
Right.
and ask those questions, beforehand and after. So do aftercare, with your
Right.
child as the parent, just to make sure they're okay, because that one experience could lead them down to like trauma, and and not want to go to the doctor again. And so if
Oh,
they're not taking care of their
yeah.
reproductive
I'm
health
so
needs, then
glad that you said that. I'm so glad that you mentioned the trauma related to that and them not visiting, because, and I do not recommend this to anyone. I am a healthcare provider. Do not take this as advice, but I like to be open and honest and share my own experiences. I didn't even go see the gynecologist after I had my child. I
mm,
didn't go for a 6-week checkup. I didn't, because I have that very traumatizing connection to it. And on top of that, again, as a healthcare provider, I'm aware of those implicit biases and things like that as well. So in my mind, you know, I knew I was healthy. I knew I was okay. I'm very aware of my body. I felt comfortable doing that. But again, experiences, I'm glad that you said that, because experiences like that can lead someone to do what I did, and they might not be in the same, status of health that I
right,
fortunately was. So
right.
I'm glad that you said that.
Wonderful. And Hope said hi to us, and she also had a question. She said, or a comment, she said, having a female gynecologist is such a different experience, and I believe it makes a huge difference in the experience. It did for me
100%.
personally. Thank you
100%.
so much for that, Hope. Thank you so much for joining in. I completely agree, because for me, and I'll keep it on the eye, like my gynecologist was a male, but I started to see the nurse practitioner more than I did him. And
Mhm.
it was a completely different experience, because she knew, like, she's a woman, she knew, I could talk more freely about, my periods and the heaviness, that it just the response. And not that he wasn't an excellent a doctor, it was just the conversation was much more ease. There wasn't as much pressure, there wasn't as much discomfort. And it kind of makes me want to share the comment that Miss Rittenauer has. And she said, these conversations are so important, because I think it's up to us to break those cycles that were handed down to us. And she said, I know that the world Chantal and I grew up in was didn't and did I didn't want my daughter to feel the shame and unease about her body, because we did about, she's saying her daughter's own body, because it was a completely different time, and I didn't even tell my mom when I got my period. Like,
Mm.
she found out because I was changing my pad every time there was blood on it. I didn't know you
Mhm.
could wear it, for
Mhm.
longer than that. But that's how I was outed. I didn't
Yeah.
say anything, and one of the reasons why I didn't say anything is because I had a sister that was never diagnosed with endometriosis, and her cramps were so bad that I just did not want to get a period, because I'm
Mhm.
like, if she's going through that, I don't want it. Like, I don't, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to have kids. I don't, if this is the only way, I'm good.
Yeah.
So it was very traumatizing, but it also, just a lot of it scared me. And then also too, it wasn't freely talked about. It was made fun of more than it was talked
Yeah.
about. Like, ew, you got your period. Like, it was called a curse. Like,
Yeah.
it was called the curse. So it
Yeah.
was just like so many negative things associated with periods. But now we know it's a gift. And the way
Yeah.
you speak about it is so beautiful that it's like, oh my gosh, this is lovely. It gives me warm feelings on the inside. But it took me, to become an adult, to have that mindset, and then to have the safe space and to be comfortable to talk about. But I also, because, you talked about how you knew your own body after childbirth. But
Yeah.
let's talk about periods before and after childbirth,
Ooh.
how they change.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics too. So everybody's period can be different prior to and after childbirth. I think that it's so important to really understand these phases, your menstrual cycle, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase, When you understand that process and you know within your own body what your signs and symptoms are during those individual processes, if you're trying to get pregnant, that's one of the best ways to do it. You know, people will talk about diet change, which is very important. It's something that I recommend that women are conscious of before they plan to get pregnant. Or they'll talk about, you know, using all these different kind of strips, and they're utilizing all this money for all these products, when one of the main things would be just to know and understand your body, and know and understand when you're in these different phases, so that you can know and understand when your best window frame is to get pregnant. That being said, there can be a big change in how you menstruate after you have your child. Some women, even if they are breastfeeding, will continue a normal period. And then if they're not breastfeeding, usually women will kind of go back into their regular period within about 2 to 3 months after childbirth. But if you're full-time breastfeeding and you have a child stuck to you 24/7, like I did, you can experience something called amenorrhea, which is very common and very regular, but some women just aren't aware of it, and aren't aware of it in relation to nursing. So when you nurse a baby and you're nursing them full time, what your body does is it kind of sends itself into this protective mode, the making of that milk, the different chemicals that are produced, and it kind of tells your body, we can't afford another baby right now. You know, we're nursing a baby. There's one that we already have. It would be detrimental to us to create another one right now, because the one that you have, it needs this milk, it needs the sustenance, it needs the focus of your body, right? So it kind of stops the process of that period, and then you don't have one while you nurse. A lot of women don't experience one, and that can range from months after you give birth and while you're nursing, up to years after, you know, birth and nursing. I didn't have a period for 18 months after I had my daughter. So yeah.
I didn't, when you first told me that, I was like, oh, why didn't I do that? Like, if I would have knew better, I would have did it, because I had just terrible periods. They, like you said before in a comment, they look like crime scenes. So I would have definitely loved the benefit of that. I would have went through the chapped nipples and the biting for all of that. So, you know, I thank you for that, because I never realized that. I never understood it. And Misty said that her periods used to be 5 to 7 days, and they were very painful before she had children. And as soon as she had her first child, her periods changed to 2 to 3 days with no pain and no cramping. And that is just, I think the body is just amazing that it can do that. And she also said she knows exactly what you're talking about when like learning your body, because she knew exactly when she was ovulating, but it took maturity and also her learning her body. So you have to listen to your body. Like, you know, just like when your body's like, you get a cold, you get a stuffed nose, or, you know, so there's symptoms prior, and you recognize like, oh, this is a cold coming on. You know that, but you're not going to think of it in other ways.
Right, exactly.
As your period, or when you're ovulating, or you can have a child. So it's just as important. I don't think anything is more important than the other. But when you think about like getting your period and the changes, and you know, you might have had to use 2 boxes of pads or a box of tampons and things like that. But when you go to the store to purchase these things, why is there so much shame and embarrassment attached to purchasing menstrual products? Why do you think that is?
I think, again, because there's such a shame and embarrassment around periods and in total, you know what I mean? So then when you're out in public and you have to buy these products, then you're thinking like, everybody's looking at me and everybody knows that I'm on my period. So then again, and a lot of these products, again, are associated with being unclean or dirty or anything like that. So you don't want anybody to see you buying your tampons. Like, you don't want anybody seeing you buying your pads. You know, you're kind of tucking them away and hiding them. And again, this is something that I see women do to this day. Again, women will be at work hiding their pad under their arm, sneak into the bathroom. So it's just, it's one, and I think, if not the greatest event of shame that we experience on our entry into womanhood is our periods.
Wow.
So why wouldn't the products that we buy be shameful or embarrassing for us as well, if we're not educated on why it shouldn't be?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because you work in the health profession and you have women hiding their pads and tampons, and like, what? Like, how many times we have to say periods are normal? Periods are
Right.
normal for a healthy female body. If you do not have one, that may be a sign that there is something not right going on in your body with your reproductive organs. Like the period is like, I'm healthy. This is,
Yeah.
this is how, like, it's normal. This is the function. This is, coming into from being a girl to womanhood. And when it's introduced in such a negative way, yeah, like I used to, let me not lie. I really was never embarrassed to purchase like menstrual products, but I have seen people like hide them and put like stuff over top of it so you don't see it. And I'm like, girl, it's just me. Like I'm buying, I'm about to hit that out right
Mhm.
now. So I'm right with you. It was there a sell?
You're
That's what I'm
right.
about to ask you next. So
Mhm.
like help me help us. But
Yeah.
it's just something that it's just funny. And then even Misty also said, and I think we talked about this when it was you and I, and she said, yes, and that's why I don't agree with birth control because that stops you having a period. Some people, don't like because of that. But some people
Yeah.
do because their periods are so bad that birth control is one way to like to stop it or to help it. So, again, it's a lot of, I love the engagement of this conversation and thank you so much for the comments. Think everybody has different beliefs, everybody has different reasons on why they do things. And again, that's why we have Ty here and she's helping us understand a lot of the difficulties that we don't understand. Again, if you're just now joining in, I'm Shantla Israel. I'm the host of Chats with Shantla, but I have Ty Noel here and she's a registered nurse and a doula, which is very similar to a midwife. And she's talking about periods, puberty, and more with me. And we have so much engagement with our comments tonight. If you're just now tuning in, hit replay. Make sure you see it from the beginning because she dropped so many gems that my purse is full, but I'm still going to take some more and carry them. So I'm now on my backpack, because the gems she's dropping are too big for my purse that I got to go into something larger. So I just love it. I love to learn. I love storytelling, and that's why this platform is to build, connect, and collaborate. But if I'm a little bit selfish, I love to hear what people are talking about their experiences because that's how we get better. And we're going to continue this conversation. And Ty, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday evening, the day
Oh, my
before
pleasure.
Easter, and just telling us so many things. But I do want to get to this question because somebody left it in the comments in the first part when I was talking to Shabela about the same topic. And they were talking about menopause. For those who
Mhm.
don't know what menopause, I don't want to assume everybody knows what it is, but can you tell us in the most layman terms what menopause is?
So, in the most layman terms I could think of, menopause is defined as having no menstruation for 12 months, full 12 months. You know what I
Wow.
mean? If you could go 10 months and then that last two, you have a menstrual cycle, they're not going to consider it menopause, but they
Wow, I
usually
didn't know
like,
that.
yeah. So if you go that full calendar year with no menstrual cycle, then you're technically by definition in menopause. And I
Wow.
think the average age for that is between like 45 and 55, with most women experiencing around 51 to 52. And then, there's different symptoms that can come with menopause or prior to menopause: chills or hot flashes,
Mm,
weight gain, mood change, things very similar to that we experience on our period. But yeah, so in the most layman terms, that's what menopause is. And menopause happens because you have this drop in estrogen in
okay.
your blood. So your body's kind of, I guess, saying, we don't need all this estrogen anymore. We're not really going to be reproducing from here on out. So it kind of drops those levels in your body and it stops that follicular function, that passing of that egg through the tube, and then you experience menopause. So
Wow. And there's also like another type of menopause. It's induced menopause. What is that?
okay. So induced menopause can happen if you have a hysterectomy, a partial hysterectomy, things like that. It could be medicinally induced as well, but usually it happens from, that surgery, that hysterectomy, that partial hysterectomy, which is again something that more Black women experience at a higher rate than other women who might experience induced menopause. And that's because, again, they're treated for these fibroids and endometriosis late, to the point where the doctor says, okay, let's go ahead and take out one of these tubes or both of these tubes, or we're going to do a full hysterectomy. And that removal of that organ or a piece of that organ from that body does this a synthetic version of the same thing. It lowers that
Mhm.
estrogen level in your body, kind of tells your body to go, like, to stop that follicular function, and you go into menopause.
And thank you so much for that. And you also kind of touched on this already, but can menopause cause mood changes or mood swings?
Absolutely. It can cause mood changes because of the hormonal changes in your
Hmm.
body, and also just because of the change in the experience of your life. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You kind of have to settle with a different part of womanhood, which is still something to celebrate. But you kind of live with your period for so long that you get, you know what I mean? Some women are never comfortable with it. Some women are comfortable with it, and there's kind of like a comfort in knowing that your period is
Yeah.
coming or that you're gonna get it, and it is a sign. As much shame as there is connected to it, women don't take that shame and transfer it into something else, and they oftentimes don't realize that they do celebrate their period more often
Right.
than not. Yeah.
I do.
So
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. And then I was just gonna say that, so when we don't have that anymore, sometimes we kind of have to mourn that
Mhm.
loss. So that
Yeah.
can cause, mood changes as well. You can kind of get a little sad and
Yeah.
or maybe depressed or something like that. So yeah, mood changes are a big part of menopause.
Absolutely. I know many women when I've had the conversation about menopause and like not whether it was induced menopause or it was just the natural cycle that they went through. It does because like you said, been a part of their lives. Like think about it. Some women have their period for 40 years, or longer,
Yeah.
and to have that taken away, it's a part of the identity of being a woman. And how did now I perceive that and how
Right.
does it I show up for myself in
Right.
that way.
Right. And then
So
there is so much shame connected to it, but it is such a defining aspect of womanhood that I think that that's
mhm,
a big part of it too. You know what I mean? That
right.
people are shamed by it, but it's this sign of being a woman. So
Absolutely.
when you don't have it anymore, you kind of have to readjust your idea of who am I as a woman without my
Yeah.
cycle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then if somebody is going through menopause, how do you maybe suggest how they might, if they're looking for a specialist, how could a woman find a menopause specialist? Is it the same as a gynecologist?
It would be the same as a gynecologist, but kind of with a specialty attached to it. They might have a focus in menopause specifically, but it's 10 times out of 9 going to be a gynecologist because that's still related to that reproductive organ. You can either ask, a lot of people don't utilize that insurance card. They don't call the back of that number and say, hey, can you find a provider in
Right.
my area that, specializes in this or does that? So that would
Mhm.
be my first suggestion, would be to start there. If you can't already go to your gynecologist's office or shoot them a message, maybe from your MyChart and say, hey, can you, because a lot of the times in order to see a specialist, you're going to have to get that pre-approval from the
Right.
initial doctor anyways. So you might want to start there. It never
Mhm.
hurts to Google. Again, I am a big advocate for asking people in your community because you're going to get those direct experiences from the people that you can trust and who have similar experiences to you
Right.
or who might experience or see things in the same way that you do or similarly. So I think
Yeah.
it's always super beneficial to just ask the people around you, ask your community, even if it's not a physical community and it's an online community, maybe touch base with those people first and see if you can find one there as well.
Absolutely. And Ty, this has been such an amazing conversation. I've learned even so much more.
I'm
But
glad.
I just, want to close this conversation out with asking you for all the girls and all the women that are watching, even some of the men, and they may go and I encourage men, if you're watching, to go and ask the women in your life, how they're feeling. Are they okay? How can you support them? How
Mm,
can you listen? How can you show some empathy and compassion, but become an addition to their support system when they're going through this? Because a lot of young women don't have that and they're struggling with that. But I do want to ask you, what advice could you give to girls or women who are struggling with dealing with their period, even if they've had it for 5, 10, 15 years? But, what would you say to someone that says, Ty, I'm coming to you and I'm coming to you, not even just as, a medical professional, but I'm struggling with the acceptance of my period, or, even a girl who may have not gotten her first period yet and she's very fearful, and how would you comfort or how would you show support, and what would that be like?
that's a great question. I think the first thing that I would start with is trying to, or maybe questioning them about where that fear or that discomfort comes from, because a lot of the time it's going to be a lack of education. I'm a big proponent of educating. Once you figure out how something works, or fear works because a lot of the times people don't understand it, right? So when we come to an understanding of how things are and how they function, then that takes away that fear or that discomfort, that lack of understanding. So I would kind of start there, making sure that they're fully educated on what it is they're uncomfortable with or traumatized by. And then I would tell them to find a community, to build a community of women, even if that starts with one woman. I would tell them to get comfortable asking women that you're comfortable with what their period is like or what their cycle is like, because you'll oftentimes find that it's not that different from yours, or that they're experiencing the same things that you are, and that's a comfort in itself. And you can kind of touch base with them and see what it is that they do to mitigate these symptoms, or what they did to kind of get rid of that shame that they felt or that discomfort. And again, that's why that community is so important, and especially that community of women specifically, because it's important to have those conversations. It's important to talk to each other so that we don't end up with women who are shameful and embarrassed of their period. So I think my main thing would just be encourage them to find women that they can talk to and feel comfortable talking to, and just bounce ideas and off of each other, and just kind of just talk in general. It doesn't have to be a healthcare centered conversation. It doesn't have to be highly educated conversation. You could literally just sit and talk about being a woman, and that's so beneficial to us as a group and as a community, not just for our periods, but for ourselves in general. Women need women, you know what I mean? We need each other for things like periods. We need each other for things like motherhood, and we need each other for things like just being women together and having that common bond. So that community is super important.
I absolutely love this conversation. It was so good. I just kind of, before we close out, I want to just share some of the comments. Ms. Rittenauer said, thank you both so much. It's been a privilege to take on the role of a student tonight, and you both were awesome as teachers. Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you so much for that response. Misty literally said, I like you, Ty. We are in line, my sister. I love her. Cannot wait to have her on the show. She also said she really enjoyed this episode immensely. And she said, Hope also said that she's going to go back and watch from the beginning. I did tune in late, but I'm so glad that I caught this. Women need women. And that is so true. That is a perfect way to close out this special episode of Chats with Shantla, where we were chatting with Ty Noel, a registered nurse and a doula, about puberty, periods, and more. Ty, thank you so much for just giving me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad we did this conversation. Oh my goodness.
I loved it. You were amazing.
On Chats with Shantla forever. So I was really excited. And thank you to everybody that asked questions. I enjoyed the conversation. And I think that there's so many other offshoots of conversation that can come from it. Just could come from just women's topics in general. So I really appreciate you having this platform. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So until next time, this has been another episode of Chats with Shantla. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for watching another episode of Chats with Shantla. See you next time.